We're on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, and we're learning the Mishnah, which we didn't complete yesterday, of the Avodas Kohen Gadol and the Seder of his Avodah on Yom Kippur. And now we're discussing the preparation of the Kohen Gadol for his first Avodah, and the kickoff of the day is going to be the Tamid Shel Shachar. And the Mishnah says on the third line of the Mishnah, it says, Heviulo es ha, and we'll add the word tle, which is the Tamid Shel Shachar. Now, the whole year round, one Kohen, whichever Kohen it was, would shecht the tle, and another Kohen standing with a mizrach would be makabel l'dam. However, with regard to Yom Kippurim, all avodos have to be implemented by the Kohen Gadol himself. So now he has to do both the shechita and the kabbalas hadam. How does he accomplish that goal? And the answer is krotzo. We'll see what the word krotzo means in a second, but it basically means shechita. He does a partial shechita, but enough such that that shechita will be a valid kosher shechita. He cuts rov shnei simonim, and now the blood is coming out. He gives the shechita knife over to another Kohen, and that's called merik acher. Acher means a different Kohen. Merik means ligmar es hashchita. So the miut, the minority of the two simonim, will now be cut by a different Kohen. And we have to discuss why. If all avodas have to be done by the Kohen Gadol, how could the gemar shchita, the mirik hashchita, be implemented by another Kohen? Now, why is this done? Why doesn't the Kohen Gadol complete shchita himself? Is umerik acher shchita al yado, so that kibel es adam, so that now the Kohen Gadol could be makabel l'dam. If the Kohen Gadol would have to finish the entire shchita, then the dam would be all over the place. Or maybe another Kohen would pick up the dam and receive it. But that's not enough. We need the Kohen Gadol to be makabel l'dam. So what happens is he quickly allows the second, the second string person to complete the shechita, another Kohen, while he now immediately picks up the mizrach, the receptacle, and he's makabel l'dam of the tummy. Okay. Now, first, let's focus on the word krotzo. According to the Gemara later on Daf Lamed Beis, the language krotzo means hariga. And this is based on a pasuk in Yirmiyah. It says, karatz mitafon ba ba. However, Rashi, in his commentary on Yirmiyah, on that pasuk, he interprets the word karatz not lahariga, but rather as chituch, to slice. And the Meiri embellishes this, and he says that krotzo means chituch hanase b'mehirus, a slicing that's done with urgency. Mehirus means quickly. Why? Because the Kohen Gadol now has to run over to be makabel l'dam. Now, the Gemara later on Daf Lamed Beis quotes both Ula and Rabbi Yochanan that agree that kritza means shchitas rov shnei simonim. Now, the Kohen Gadol himself implements the shechita that is absolutely critical, which is called Rov Shnei Simonim. Why is that critical? The halacha is that if no one completes the shechita, right, there was supposed to be someone waiting there to complete the shechita, but it didn't materialize, then the shechita is kshera even without gemara shechita, because Rov Shnayim is enough to constitute a shechita kshera. So even though ein avodos hayom ksheros ela b'kohen gadol, we must have a kohen gadol for all the avodos, but nevertheless, the avodah the shechita, once the shechita is kshera with rov shnei simonim, has been implemented by the kohen gadol. So what is gemar shechita? The gemar shechita is not an avodah, because if it were, we'd have to require the kohen gadol, but rather mitzvah legomro. We want to get all the blood out in a set way, right? So what we do is we shecht even the miut basra, meaning the last two parts of the kana and the veshet, meaning the windpipe and the esophagus. Umikol makom einzu mitzvah shel Torah. In other words, this was only done in order to facilitate the hotzas hadam, but it's not absolutely necessary. It's not an avodah, and therefore could be done by another kohen, because only the avodos of Yom Kippur have to be done by the kohen gadol. And now the kohen gadol is free after Rov Shnayim passing on the end of the shechita to another kohen. He's now free to be makabel l'dam. Kibel es Adam, right? The Kohen Gadol is holding on to a mizrach, and he receives the dam, and then he takes the dam over to the mizbeach v'zarko. Now, again, we're talking about the korban tamid. The korban tamid is a korban ola, and with regard to ola, we have what's called shtayim shein arba. Means that you do two zrikos on two corners of the mizbeach. These two corners are across from each other with a diameter. So we need what's called mizrachis tzfonis and maravis dromis. Right. So if you had a square, you would talk about the top left and the bottom right. Okay, fine. That's called shtayim shein arba, and this is true, of course, the whole year round. Now, what's going on with the dam after the zrika? There's what's called shiorei adam, which means that the receptacle, the mizrach, has extra dam, and we have a din of shvicha al yisod mizbeach. That's on the southern side of the mizbeach. That's where they did on the yisod mizbeach. They did the shvichas shirayim. Now, what's going on with the tamid itself, the lamb, during this period in which the Kohen Gadol is kabbalas adam, zrikas adam, shvicha shiorei adam? Now the Kohanim are busy with what's called hafshatas or hakarban, or with an ayin, v'nituach evarav litzarech haktorah. So there are two actions here, two involvements that do not require the Kohen Gadol, and that is hafshata, which means to take the hides off the animal, the skins off the animal, and then nituach evarav, the avarim, the various organs of the korban tamid have to be cut up, and then there'll be haktorah al gabi mizbeh. But these avodos of hafshata and nituach einon chayavos le'asas aydei kohen. The Gemara is already established. We touched on it earlier that the hafshata and the nituach do not have to be implemented by the Kohen Gadol, and it's an avodah sheyesh ba tircha. It's a very tedious malacha, and they wanted to alleviate the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur because he's got a very, very busy schedule. That's an understatement. So that other Kohanim were in charge of the Hafshata and the Nitua. Okay, now what are we up to? Nichnas, the Kohen Gadol goes now into the Heichal, lahakdir ktores shel shachar. Again, this is not the ktores that we discussed earlier today. This is not the unique ktores of Yom Kippur. This is the daily ktores. And the ktores was brought on a daily basis on the Mizbach HaZav, otherwise known as Mizbach HaPnimi. What else did the Kohen Gadol do at this point when he went into the Heichal? Number two, Heitev HaNeros. Heitev HaNeros usually means that he has to take out the wicks after they finish burning from the menorah. He has to take out any sort of leftover oils or ashes from last night's hadlok on the menorah. And then we have a replacement. So that Hatavas Haneros means not only getting rid of the Shirayim, what was ever the vestige of the last night's hadlaka, but also to prepare for the new hadlaka, which the Kohen Gadol is going to implement. And what we need is laniach, to place into the bazichim shemen chadash upsilos chadoshas. We need new supply of oil and wicks. Now the Kohen Gadol goes out of the Heichal into the Azara, and that's to complete the avoda of the Karban Tamid, because again, he's done the Zrik of the Karban Tamid, but he hasn't yet implemented the Haktara of the Karban Tamid. Ulahakir v'sarosh ve'es ha'ivarim. So the Kohen Gadol is going to be carrying the rush, the head of the lamb, and the Eivarim of the lamb after they were subject to Nituach. And that's what he's going to be maktir on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Let's just go over what we have. We have number one, the Torah of the Tamid Shel Shachar. And that begins with Zrika and ends with Haktoras Haivarim and the Rosh Veivarim. In the middle, between the Shechita, Kabbalah, and Zrika, and the ultimate Haktorah of the Karban al Gabi Eish HaMizbeach, in between, past the Avodah, before the Haktorah, were two different Avodos of the Kohen Gadol. One is the Ktores, and the other is Hatovas HaNeros. What else? Now, by the way, in my commentary here, he has a whole list of Eivarim which were cut into segments and carried by the Kohen Gadol onto the Eish HaMizbeach. Number one, he has Raglayim, he's got Yodayim, he's got Oketz, Chazeh, Savor, Slaos, Kirbayim. That's the list. So again, each one of these, it requires study unto itself, but we're not going to go through that now. We're talking about a Karban Ola that's Kulo Kolil. It's completely burnt on the Mizbeach. Just that there are segments of the animal that are, after Nituach, are being carried by the Kohen Gadol for Haktorah. Then we get to Chavitim. What are the Chavitim? Chavitim is a Karban Mincha on a daily basis made up of 12 loaves of baked chalos. And again, exactly how to prepare these loaves, you need what's called Asiris Ephas Soles, which is a certain volume of refined flour. And those were fried fried in a pan. That's why it's called chavitin, minchas chavitin, because a chavitin are these pans that they use to fry the soles together with shemen. Now, what happened to the minchas chavitin? It was divided into half. Machzisa, half of it was brought on the mizbech with the tamid shel shachar, umachzisa, and the other half was designated and left over for the tamid shel bein arbaim. So these two karbanos, tamid shel shachar, tamid shel bein arbaim, were accompanied each by 6 chalos afuyos mituganos, which were the chavitim, the minchas chavitim of the Kohen Gadol. And what else? The es hayayin. There was a nisuch of a quarter of a hin, revias hahin yayin, and that nisuch was on the mizbech. It was poured yayin that was poured on the mizbech after the akrava of the korban tam. Okay, now at this point, the Tana of the Mishnah takes a little bit of a break, so to speak. He goes off on what you might call a tangent, and he starts discussing the korban chata. The ketores and the tamid of the whole year round. Till now, he was focused pretty much on Yom Kippur. Dor shel shachar hoisa kreva bein dam le'evarim. In other words, and this is pretty much what we discussed earlier, there's a haktaras which is wedged in the middle of the tamid. What do I mean in the middle? There's A and B, and the ketores is going to come between A and B. A is what's called dam, which means zrika. That means all the avodos that culminate with zrika. And at the end, which means after the haktaras in the middle, would come the haktaras ha'emurim, or ha'evarim. And shall bein arbaim, bein ha'evarim l'nisachim. So the ketores, remember we said we split the ketores into 2 parts. The second part, which is meant to accompany the tamid shel bein arbaim, was brought between the evarim of the tamid and the nisachim, the minchas nisachim that came later on. And in between, we had the haktaras. Now the Mishnah goes on to another topic, and that is the violation or the possibility of violating a malacha on Yom Kippur. What happens is that the Kohen Gadol needs 5 tvilos in the mikveh during the course of Yom Kippur. The mikveh, which is made up of rainwater that's collected, is very cold. And the question is, let's say the Kohen Gadol is very sensitive to the cold. He's called an istanis. We'll see what that word istanis means exactly. Or alternatively, he's a zaken. He's a very old gentleman. And it's very hard for him to tolerate the cold water. So the Mishnah says, Im haya Kohen Gadol zaken. The water is very cold and he's old. O istanis. Now Rashi interprets istanis as me'unag umefunach. It almost sounds a little pejorative, meaning me'unag and mefunach are words that we describe these feinschmeckers. Everything has to be perfect. Don't give me any cold. I'm not jumping into any cold water. However, others say that istis means gufo mitsunan v'kar. He's, especially with elderly people, that they're very sensitive to the cold. So what did they do? On Erev Yom Kippur, lo chamin. They heated up a pitcher full of hot water, a kumkum of hot water. And there was another possibility, which Rashi mentions over here, based on a brisa later on of Rabbi Yehuda, that they took small slivers of metal, of barzel, they heated it up on coals, umatilim l'tochatzona, and they could actually put these hot strips of metal or hot boiling water and pour it into the mikveh. Now, this act of pouring it into the mikveh took place on Yom Kippur itself. So, admittedly, they didn't turn on a fire to heat up the water on Yom Kippur. That they had to do on Erev Yom Kippur, right before Yom Kippur began. But yet, they are now putting into cold water, boiling hot water or boiling, sizzling hot strips of metal. And all this l'tochat tzoneh into the cold mikveh. Kidei shetafig tzinosa. So it will convert cold water into, let's say, warm air temperature or lukewarm water so that the Kohen Gadol can tolerate. But here we have a major discussion in the Gemara later on about violating Yom Kippur, because when you pour hot water into cold water, that itself might be an act of bishul. Okay. Now we begin the Gemara. This Gemara is complicated. We'll try to work this out together. My Masifta has a graph here to graph out this Gemara that takes up half a page. There's so many different variables. We're going to focus our attention today, whatever we have left, and mostly tomorrow, on that part of the Mishnah that calculates not the tefillos so much. There were 5 tefillos during the course of the day of Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, but rather what's called Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. There were twice as many Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayims as there were tefillos. So if there were 5 tefillos, then we have 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Now, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim is triggered off, or the requirement is triggered off, not by the tvila per se, but by what we call chiluf begadim. Every time the Kohen Gadol would change his begadim from one category of Big Day Kahuna to another, meaning from Big Day Zav to Big Day Lavan, or vice versa, he would need Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And this is going to take place 5 times during the course of Yom Kippur. However, it's really not 5. It's 1 plus 4. The first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is the change of clothing from Big Day Chol to Big Day Kodesh. So unlike all the other Kiddushin, which took place in changing your garment, the Kohen Gadol change from Big Day Zav to Big Day Lavan, or vice versa, here, the very first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is changing from ordinary weekday clothes to Big Day Kahuna. In this case, Big Day Zav, because he starts his avodah of Talmud in Big Day Zav. So the big question now is, let's see if we can formulate this properly. Does he need 2 kiddushim on the first round, or 1 is sufficient? What do I mean? Every time the Kohen Gadol changes his garments, 2 things happen. One is called pshita, and the other is called levisha. Again, if we were in a classroom, I would write these words on the whiteboard, because everything we're going to learn now revolves around these 2. Pshita means to take off the garments, and levisha means to put on the new garments. Now, Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim relates to both of them. We need a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for pshita, for taking off the old garments that he has to take off, and we need another Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for levisha. Hence, if he's going to change his garments 5 times, we need 10 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, which, as I said before, is twice the number of Tvilos that the Kohen Gadol will experience on Yom Kippur. Now, if we assume that within the context of pshita, lifshot, meaning to take off his garments, the pshita that generates Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim has to be pshitas big day kahuna. The first pshita is these poshet big day chol. That doesn't generate Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So there's good news and bad news. The good news is that he only needs Kiddush Yadayim for levisha on the first round to put on his big day zav to begin his avodah. The bad news is that that's going to reduce the number of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim from 10 down to 9, because we're going to drop the initial Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim of Pshita when he takes off his big day chol, because only the removal of big day kodesh generates Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Amru Rabbanan Kamei de Rav Papa. The Talmidim presented a thesis in front of Rav Papa, and you'll see that Rav Papa rejected that thesis, and the Talmidim are going to reject Rav Papa, or reject him with the kasha, and back and forth like a ping pong ball. So what did they present? The thesis they presented to Rav Papa? Our Mishnah, the Tan of our Mishnah, the lo ki Rabbi Meir. What does that mean? Our Mishnah is of the opinion, as we said earlier, that the first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is only 1 and not 2. Meaning the levisha of Big Day Zav generates Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, but the pshita of taking off Big Day Chol has no status whatsoever. It doesn't register, and it doesn't require Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Again, notwithstanding the question that we had about reducing the number from 10 to 9. That shouldn't bother you now. Don't worry, the Gemara is going to cover that. So the Bnei Yeshiva presented to Rav Papa the conclusion that this Mishnah could not reconcile itself with Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir is of the position that you would need 2 Kiddushim even on the first round. The Ike Rabbi Meir, even the Omar Trei Kiddushay Albisha Ovid Lahu, Achanami Trei Kiddushi Alavisha Ovid Lahu. Now, this Rabbi Meir is formulated in the Mishnah later on in Daf Lamed Daled. We're here on Daf Lamed Aleph. So we'd have to fast forward 3 blot to see Rabbi Meir in his original, but let's suffice it to say that Rabbi Meir, in the case of Tvila Shnia, which is the subject of the Mishnah Daf Lamed Daled, the second Tvila, he takes the opinion. Just 1 second. Now we have to keep in mind that when we get to Tefillah Shniya, we should require Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim twice. Because if we assume that Pshita requires Kiddush Yadayim and then Levitcha second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, so when we're up to the second Tefillah, we should require a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim before he takes off the Big Day Zav and dons the Big Day Lava. So that's one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, which is the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim of Pshita when he takes off the Big Day Zav, and a second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim when he puts on his Big Day Lava. Rabbi Meir says, no, you're making a big mistake. Although I agree with you that when he dons the Big Day Zav, or in that case, Tefillah Shniya, when he takes off Big Day Zav, he puts on Big Day Lavan. I agree with you that he requires a double Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, but not the way you said it, not a Kiddush before Pshita, before he takes off the Big Day Zav, and then a second Kiddush when he puts on the Big Day Lavan, because the way you said it, Rabbi Meir is arguing, the first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is on the Pshita, is on the removal of the Big Day Zav. I disagree with you. I want the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim to be after he takes off the Big Day Zav, and a second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after he puts on the Big Day Lava. So conceptually, what is Reb Meir's point? Reb Meir's point is that it's not two mechayvim, one for Pshita and one for Levisha, such that the first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim should take place before the Pshita. No, says Rabbi Meir. Both Kiddush Yadayim Raglayims are generated by Levisha. In other words, he's putting on Big Day Lava. He needs one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim before he puts on the Big Day Lava, and a second one after he wears the Big Day Lava. But both of them, in a sense, sandwich the Levisha of Big Day Lava, meaning the Levisha is now wedged like a sandwich. It's the filling of a sandwich between one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim and another Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Not like the Chachamim, the Tanakama, the unknown anonymous Tana, who has a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim before he takes off the Big Day Zav, which means that the Pshita generates Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. No, says Rabbi Meir, the first of the two Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is going to be right before he dons the Big Day Lavan. And then after he puts on the Big Day Lavan, he has a second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. But both the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim number 1 and number 2 are both engendered by the Levisha, not by the Pshita. Says the Gemara, meaning the Talmidei Yeshiva, if that be the case, then according to Rabbi Meir, even on the first round, the first Tvila, meaning when he takes off his Big Day Chol, his weekday clothing, and he puts on his Big Day Zav for the Tamid Shel Shachar, he needs two Kiddush Yadayim Raglayims. One before the Levisha, the Big Day Zav, and another after the Levisha, the big days off. Because according to Rabbi Meir, the Levisha generates the two Kiddushim, not like the Tanakama who holds that the Pshita generates one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim and the Levisha another. So it means that our Mishnah that only requires one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for the first Tefillah, that reflects the Shita of the Tanakama. Why? Because there's no Pshita that could generate a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, because the Pshita was Big Day Chol. And all you have is the Machayev of Levisha, which is a Machayev of only one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Hence, as we said before, we reduced the number of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim from 10 down to 9. But according to Rabbi Meir, the Mishnah makes no sense. Because even on the first round, when he takes off his Big Day Chol, he still needs a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim as a preliminary, as an introduction to the Levisha of the Big Day Zav. And a second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after he dons the Big Day Zav. Because Levisha generates two Kiddushim. If I could see you, I would ask you to raise your hand if you understood what I said. What I just said took me hours to figure out. I mean, it may sound like it's just, just rolling out of my sleeves, but this was a lot of work. And if you want to underline the key words in the Gemara, that'll help, at least helps me conceptualize this Gemara. It's Trei Kiddushei Alevisha Avid Lahu. Rabbi Meir's Shita is that these two Kiddushim are both engendered by Levisha, which means in the case of the first round, would not cash in to two Kiddushim. Why? Because I'm sorry, just the opposite. Which in the case of the first round would generate two Kiddushim. Why? Because he takes off his Big Day Chol, puts on his Big Day Love, his Big Day Zav, and every Levisha generates two Kiddushim, one before the Levisha, one after the Levisha. That's Rabbi Meir. So that before he starts the first Avodah of Tamid, he's going to need a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim before he puts on the Big Day Zav, and then a second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after he puts on the Big Day Zav. How could our Mishnah say that with regard to the first Tefillah, he only needs one Kiddush? On the Levisha of Big Day Zav, according to Rabbi Meir, every Levisha generates two Kiddushim. Therefore, we have to assume that our Mishnah reflects the sheet of the Tanakama, the Chachamim, against Rabbi Meir. Ikar Meir, I'm going to review it again. Kevan the Omer Trei Kiddushei Alevisha Avid Lahu. That the Levisha itself generates two Kiddushim, one before the Levisha and one after the Levisha. Now, again, there are other variables here in this equation, just to mention. I don't want to confuse you. But the first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim not only takes place, according to Rabbi, before the Levisha, takes place even before the Tevilah. So what happens is, he's got Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, then he has Tevilah, then he dons the second set of Begadim, and following the Levisha of the second set of Begadim, he needs a second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So it's Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, Tevilah, Levisha, and Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. It's Hachinami here with regard to the first Tevilah, Trei Kiddushei Alevisha. He's going to require two Kiddushim for the Levishas Begadim. He's going to require one Levisha one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim before the Levisha and the second one after the Levisha. And since it says in our Mishnah that Kohen Gadol is only Mekadesh Yodav V'Raglav one time with regard to the beginning of his preparation for the Avodah of the Tamid, it means that our Mishnah is against Rabbi Meir, but rather reflects the sheet of the Chachamim who argue against Rabbi Meir later on in Daf Lamed Daled, and they hold that there is a Kiddush before Pshita, before he takes off the Big Day Zav, and another Kiddush after he puts on the Big Day Lavan, which means that according to the Chachamim, Pshita itself generates one of the two Kiddushim. And in the case of the Tefillah Rishona, that Pshita from Big Day Chol would not generate a Kiddush. Amalahu. Oh, I see we ran out of time. I apologize. So tomorrow, Bli Neder, we're going to take up Rav Papa's counter argument to refute the Talmidei Yeshiva and insist that our Mishnah could be reconciled even with Rabbi Meir, because Rav Papa had a different take on Rabbi Meir's Shita. And then we'll see why the Gemara rejects Rav Papa until finally Rav Papa lifts up his hands and he says, "You're right. I wasn't aware of a certain price, and therefore I removed my original state." So this is a as I mentioned before, this is a sugya that has many different dimensions to many different parts, complex. I think we have a good foundation. Okay, then. So let me wish everyone a wonderful day. Thank you so much.